Ontario's political landscape has seen its fair share of turmoil, yet few events have resonated with the same intensity as the unfolding crisis surrounding the Greenbelt. What began as a series of bureaucratic announcements has transformed into a saga that threatens the very stability of the provincial government. This is no longer just a localized political headache for Premier Doug Ford. It has evolved into a full-blown criminal investigation, marking one of the most significant controversies in Ontario's political history. The transition from a policy debate to a potential criminal matter has fundamentally altered the public's perception of the administration. This shift has moved the conversation from the floor of the provincial legislature to the desks of federal investigators, is signaling a crisis that cannot be easily managed through traditional political messaging or standard damage control measures. At the center of this storm are high-ranking officials whose names have become synonymous with the controversy. Premier Doug Ford, who leads the Progressive Conservative Party, originally swept into power with a populist message, yet he now finds his leadership questioned over the handling of protected lands. Beside him in the early stages of this crisis were former Housing Minister Steve Clark and his then Chief of Staff, Ryan Amato. Amato became the face of the land selection process, a role that would later be scrutinized by every major oversight body in the province. These figures navigated a process that many now allege was designed to bypass standard transparency and favor a specific group of wealthy, well-connected developers, raising serious questions about the integrity of the provincial government's internal operations. The core of the scandal involves a sudden and controversial decision to remove 7,400 acres of land from the Greenbelt, a massive area of protected forests, wetlands, and sensitive ecological zones. For years, the Greenbelt was considered a permanent fixture of environmental policy, a boundary that Doug Ford had previously promised would remain untouched. The decision to open these lands for residential development was a direct contradiction of those public assurances, sparking an immediate outcry from citizens and environmental advocates. This was not a minor adjustment. It was a fundamental shift in the province's commitment to land preservation. Here occurring, despite the previous promises that these specific areas would be protected for future generations to ensure ecological sustainability. The timeline of this escalation is critical. It began in late 2022 with the initial announcement of the land removals, a move that caught environmental groups and municipalities by surprise. However, the true bombshells dropped in mid-2023 when independent oversight bodies released their findings. Auditor General Bonnie Lysyk and Integrity Commissioner J. David Wake published reports that painted a picture of a process shrouded in secrecy. These reports provided the evidence suggesting that the selection of lands was not based on environmental science, but rather on the specific requests of private interests who had direct access to the halls of power during the decision-making process, bypassing the expertise of nonpartisan civil servants. Geographically, the focus is the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, or the GTHA. This region contains some of the most valuable real estate in North America. By rezoning protected lands in this specific corridor, the government created a windfall for a handful of developers. The financial stakes involved are staggering. It is estimated that the policy shift resulted in a staggering $8.3 billion increase in the value of the lands. This massive transfer of potential wealth became the focal point of public outrage, leading to allegations that the government had bypassed standard procedures to benefit those with the right connections, prioritizing private gain over the long-term environmental health of the entire GTHA region. In the face of criticism, the Ford administration's initial defense was centered on the housing crisis. They argued that the need to build 1.5 million new homes was so urgent that it justified the sacrifice of protected land. They framed the decision as a pragmatic step to ensure that young families would have access to the market. They claimed that the housing crisis outweighed the importance of environmental boundaries. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This defense was maintained for months as the public pressure continued to mount against the progressive conservative leadership, while internal documents began to tell a different story. The situation reached a point of no return when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP, officially stepped in to investigate irregularities in the process. This move shifted the scandal beyond the realm of political accountability and into the world of criminal law. The presence of federal investigators signifies a level of legal jeopardy that few provincial governments ever face. As the investigation continues, the focus remains on whether the procedures followed were merely flawed or if they crossed the line into truly serious illegal conduct. The air in Ontario's legislature remains thick with tension as the public waits to see if these investigations will lead to formal charges against those at the highest levels of power. As the political foundations of the province continue to tremble under the weight of these mounting allegations. Bonnie Lysyc's report served as the first major crack in the government's armor. Her audit was exhaustive, stripping away political talking points. The most damning statistic was that 92% of the land removed from the Greenbelt had been specifically suggested by a handful of developers. These individuals were not random landowners. They were figures with direct access to Ryan Amato, the chief of staff to the housing minister. This revelation shattered the notion that the land swap was the result of a rigorous science-based review. Instead, it appeared the boundaries were redrawn based on the business interests of a select few who knew which doors to knock on. The details of how these suggestions were made felt like a political thriller. The process was facilitated through informal channels. At an industry dinner, developers reportedly handed over envelopes containing maps and proposals for specific land parcels they wanted removed from protection. By bypassing the expertise of civil servants and planners, the government effectively outsourced its policymaking to those who stood to profit. This preferential treatment meant technical criteria, usually required for massive land use changes, were ignored. The bureaucracy was sidelined in favor of a system that prioritized secrecy. This atmosphere of intimacy was further complicated by the Stag and Doe controversy. It was revealed that several prominent developers, including some who benefited from the Greenbelt changes, had attended a pre-wedding event for Doug Ford's daughter. While the Premier maintained these were family friends and no government business was discussed, yet the optics were devastating. To the public, it suggested a level of social proximity that blurred the lines between personal relationships and professional governance. The event became a symbol of a pay-to-play culture that critics argued had taken root within Queen's Park. The lack of transparency extended into the digital realm. Investigations found that key government members avoided official channels. They used private email accounts and encrypted messaging apps to communicate with stakeholders, appearing to circumvent freedom of information requests. This deliberate avoidance of a paper trail meant the public was kept in the dark, while significant changes to Ontario's land use policy were negotiated. And using these ghost communications suggested that the individuals involved were aware their actions would not withstand public scrutiny if conducted openly. As the scandal deepened, the government's primary defense, that the land was needed to solve the housing crisis, began to crumble. The province's Housing Affordability Task Force had previously stated that sufficient land was already available for development within existing urban boundaries. The task force concluded that the Greenbelt land was not necessary to meet the goal of building 1.5 million homes. This fact became a weapon for the opposition, as it directly contradicted the progressive conservative narrative. It highlighted a disconnect between stated goals and reality, suggesting the housing crisis was a cover for a massive transfer of land value to private hands. Internal decision-making was equally chaotic. Reports emerged of cabinet turmoil, suggesting the land swap was rushed through in days. Cabinet members were not provided with adequate briefings or environmental assessments before signing off. This lack of oversight was echoed by Integrity Commissioner J. David Wake. His report found that Minister Steve Clark had violated the Integrity Act. Wake determined that Clark failed to properly oversee his staff, leading to the deception of the provincial cabinet. The report painted a picture of a minister who had abdicated his responsibilities, allowing Ryan Amato to run a biased process. The political fallout was swift. As evidence became undeniable, resignations began. Ryan Amato was the first to depart, followed by Steve Clark. The crisis even claimed Labour Minister Monty McNaughton, each who resigned as political pressure reached a breaking point. Grassroots organizations mobilized thousands of citizens who felt betrayed. Protests at Queen's Park and across the GTHA turned the scandal into a PR nightmare for the Progressive Conservative Party. The public's anger was palpable, and the pressure was no longer just from the media. It was coming from the voters themselves. The pressure eventually became insurmountable for a leader who prides himself on reading the room. In a stark departure from his usual combative stance, Doug Ford stood before a podium in Niagara Falls and did something rarely seen in his tenure. He apologized. With a somber tone, the Premier admitted that the process was flawed and that he had made a mistake by breaking his earlier promise to leave the protected lands untouched. He announced a total reversal of the Greenbelt land swap, promising that all 7,400 acres would be returned to their previous protected status. It was a humiliating retreat for a government that had spent months defending the policy as essential for housing. However, the apology and the reversal did not mean the scandal had reached its final conclusion. The shadow of the RCMP investigation continues to loom over Queen's Park today. While the land has been returned, the federal police are not investigating the policy itself, but the conduct that led to it. Their focus remains on potential criminal activity, such as breach of trust or influence peddling. A policy reversal does not negate the actions taken in the months leading up to it, and legal experts suggest that the government remains in a precarious position. Yet the investigation ensures that the Greenbelt scandal stays in the headlines, preventing the progressive conservatives from simply turning the page. The threat of criminal charges against key figures remains a constant variable that could redefine the provincial leadership at any moment. The damage to the progressive conservative brand has been substantial. For years, the party marketed itself as a champion of the common worker, yet the billionaire developer narrative has stuck like glue. Internal polling and public surveys showed a significant dip in support, particularly in the critical region surrounding Toronto. Voters who once saw Doug Ford as a populist leader now questioned whose interests he truly represented. This shift in perception has given the opposition parties, the NDP and the Liberals, used a powerful line of attack as they prepare for the 2026 provincial election. They argue that the Greenbelt saga is not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a government that prioritizes its well-connected friends over the public good. Beyond the political sphere, the economic consequences are starting to manifest. Developers who had already invested millions in land acquisitions, planning, and infrastructure are now left with properties that have reverted to protected agricultural status. These developers, some of whom are among the province's most powerful donors, may seek legal recourse through massive lawsuits against the Crown. This creates a no-win situation for the taxpayer. Either the environment is sacrificed, or the public treasury pays out hundreds of millions in settlements to wealthy landholders. And the fallout represents, I guess, a failure of planning and governance that will take years to untangle completely. To prevent a repeat of this crisis, the government was forced to introduce new legislative safeguards. New laws now mandate that any future changes to the Greenbelt boundaries must be approved through a vote in the provincial legislature rather than a simple cabinet decision. This adds a layer of transparency and public debate that was conspicuously absent during the original land swap. While these measures are a step toward restoring the integrity of environmental protection, critics argue that the damage to public trust is deeper than any single law can fix. The fear remains that the Greenbelt is no longer viewed as a permanent sanctuary, but as a political bargaining chip that can be traded under the right conditions in the future. The role of investigative journalism was paramount in this saga. Outlets like the Narwhal and the Toronto Star demonstrated the power of the free press by uncovering private emails, tracing developer connections, and refusing to accept the government's initial denials. Their work provided the evidence that fueled the Auditor General and Integrity Commissioner's reports. As Ontario moves toward the next election cycle, the long-term impact of this scandal will be a central theme. Whether public trust can be restored depends on the transparency of the ongoing RCMP investigation and the government's ability to prove it has truly changed its ways. Ultimately, the Greenbelt scandal serves as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between development and the preservation of the public interest in modern Canadian politics. And the lessons learned here will likely echo through the halls of Queen's Park for decades to come.